Hello. Today I'm going to tie for you a Hendrickson Nymph. There's a light and a dark version and dozens of variations in between. And after today, I suppose there'll be one more. So we're going to tie this fly on a size 16 fulling mill 2x long nymph hook. We're going to use Lively Legz, and if you haven't heard of them, they make an interesting fly and silhouette shape in the water. We're going to use some rabbit fur dubbing and some Coq de Leon to make our tail. And we're going to use a couple different parts of a pheasant tail. Going to wrap a few fibers around the abdomen and make a shell back out of this mottled stuff that's near the base of the pheasant tail feather. We're going to use a Goose Quill segment for the wing case, tie it together with 8/0 olive Uni-Thread, and we'll use some fine copper wire to reinforce the pheasant tail, and a couple other materials that I think I forgot to include up front, but we'll show you as we go. So here we'll get our hook in the vise, kind of get it solid and straight, and start our thread. And I'm going to leave a little room behind the eye. It saves a little thread and it reminds me of where to stop or to make sure that I don't crowd the eye. I'm going to stop around the hook point and remove the excess. And since we're using Coq de Leon for the tail fibers, then I'm comfortable with wrapping them directly to the metal hook. Some of the softer fibers I think will cut through if you wrap uh, like pheasant tail for instance directly to a metal hook. Now here I paused because I want to get a few more of those fibers and add to this. So I just put 2 wraps around there and I line up the second bunch of fibers, unwrap the unwrap those 2 wraps, and then I can tie in the whole bunch together. So I had one stray fiber there, we'll get it out of the way and set our length and then wrap back to the bend. And this is a longish fly, so I want to make sure I use as much of the hook shank as possible. And we'll trim off the butt sections of the Coq de Leon. And we'll get the copper wire. We're going to capture it on top and let it roll over to the far side. And that's because we want the first wrap of that to come under the hook without jostling the tail. And in this pattern, I have 4 or 5 pheasant tail fibers there. I'm going to wrap them in on my side of the hook. And I'm going to wrap those in reverse. So since I'm going to reverse wrap those, I put about 5 or 6 wraps of thread so that as I'm using the rotary feature of the vise and the thread unwinds, it'll kind of come back to where I started, if that makes sense. So we got a hold of those pheasant tail fibers, wrapping backwards, and we'll get a nice little butt section on there. And kind of just went a little further to get the vise out of the way so I can tie these off. So you've probably seen other folks do this, but if you cross over and do alternating wraps in front and over top, that kind of locks when you reverse wrap the pheasant tail, that locks it in pretty well. I think I bumped the camera there after I snipped off those fibers. So now I can take the copper wire and do my rib over the pheasant tail, and that'll reinforce it. And I'm going in the conventional direction, wrapping over the top and away from me. So these 4 or 5 wraps of copper, we'll just do 4 or 5 wraps of thread. There's no harm, no foul there. And we'll put in about 3 or so wraps of thread over top of the copper and helicopter it off. So now I have a little dark butt section of pheasant tail, copper ribbed, that we're going to let show in the back of this fly. And this piece we're tying in is just a section of, it came from the lower part of that pheasant tail. and it's mottled, and I had it in my head that I was going to use it for kind of a shell back on this segment, and then still use the end and make it the wing case as well. But after looking at the picture of this fly, at least the pictures of Hendricksons that I saw, they all like to have a dark wing case. And I think from reading, I heard that the dark wing case means they're kind of ready, almost ready to emerge or something, and that may be an enticement to a fish. So in any case, I'm dubbed in some olive rabbit for dubbing, and I'm going to wrap back over that. And then get a little bulb there and use that section of pheasant tail as kind of that shell back, put a couple of wraps over top, then go in front. And like I said, right here I was going to use that for the wing case, but I didn't like how that was going, and I don't think it's going to be dark enough. So this is not necessarily make it up as you go, but if you're not satisfied and you want to change your mind, this isn't a bad way to do it. So I snipped that off of there, and now what we're doing is if I try and tie materials in, especially the wing case, which would probably go in next, and you try and tie it in over just the bare hook with that larger section of body behind there, it kind of makes a mess out of things. It'll want to fold the wing case too tight around the hook, and um, the change in diameters is just a little much. So, and then when I get to the point where I'm going to tie in those Lively Legz, they're rubber, and the smaller the diameter, the more they're going to want to wrap around, and that's not really what we want either. So here's that section. Now that section I'm showing you there is it's about as wide as the hook gap. You probably don't want it to be any wider, and it might be a fiber or two wider than it needed to be. But tying it in by the tip, I used to do it the other way, but then I had to guess where there was thickness to those fibers, and as I tied it in by the butt section of that, it was hard to judge how far down or away from the butt section I should go. So started turning around and doing it by the tip, and I have a lot more success, and it looks better to me when it's done. So we got a few wraps in there to hold it. We'll snip off the excess. And I wrap back to where I left that little segment with the shell back. So here's another add-in, and it's kind of why I didn't show you this material up front. I decided that I wanted to add what I call gills. So what I'll do is I'll come forward a little bit. This is a section of, I use this in a different fly too. This is a section of real fine fuzzy yarn. I had a whole skein of this stuff. It's perfect for this application. So I'll tie it in by the middle and kind of pull it back a little piece on each side of that wing case. I'll trim it off later, and it'll make some fuzzy little gills. I kind of stole this idea from Kelly Gallup. He did it on one of his flies, and since I've been doing it, I've been catching fish, and I can't swear to it, but maybe I catch more fish. So here we are. Now, with Lively Legz, if you're not familiar, they come with 3 pair of legs, and they're kind of a rubber material, similar to the stuff you would buy for making wing cases and different things. And the way they're made, these are made for a size 16 hook, but that doesn't mean you can use all 3. So I like to get them held down in the middle and then crisscross. It really doesn't take much to hold these in. They're not going to pull out. But I'll get some crisscrosses in there and kind of manhandle them around a little bit and get them where I want them. And at some point, and I'm back in the middle doing that, but you got to get a couple of tight wraps in there so you can start using your thread with tension again without pulling all that stuff out of whack. And we'll trim off the little butt tag section in the front and in the back. And I have another fly. I was calling it the F-15, where I use those two legs that I just trimmed off the rear end, um, trying to make a more of a hexagena pattern, the triangle-shaped bugs that you find under rocks. So you can check that out. It's in another video. But while I'm talking, we'll go back to dubbing here and make another noodle, and we want to cover that thread. So rotate around to make sure that we're covering all the thread. And if you don't have a rotary vise, I could joke here and say get one, but I got used to it. For years I tied without one, and some of the best tiers don't use the rotary feature at all. But I don't know, it can become habit forming. So once I'm sure everything's pretty well covered, I'm going to get rid of the excess dubbing and make that last hop up around the eye over the top. That'll be covered under the wing case. And I want to wrap that thread all the way to the front, just behind the eye. And there's a kind of a specific reason for that. And we'll play with the tension and pull on the end of the quill section there till we get what we want. And then I wrap back, and I go 6 or 8 wraps. And you could trim it close and use thread wraps to make the head, but I get in this habit of folding the wing case, especially these quill ones, back, and then putting my whip finish over top of it. So we use head cement or UV resin, and nothing's going to fall apart, but I don't know, I just started to like the looks of that. Sometimes I leave butt sections of the quill section. I'll trim it in different configurations, maybe V-shaped or to a point to look like some kind of emerging insect. So it gave me some options. I'm in that habit. So that's kind of just how I finish these now. So I'll come back in with the fine point scissors and just kind of snip away a couple of fibers at a time. And careful not to cut your thread here. And I'm left-handed and goofy and come in from both sides. I think you guys have seen that before. So I grab the other snips, and I'm going to use those to trim the yarn that we have for gills. Just want to make sure you don't cut a leg off here. And there you have it. It's essentially done. I do a little primping and trimming yet. There's some wild fibers that we have to get out of there, but the Lively Legz guys, they're from Ford City, Pennsylvania, so they're not far from me, and it's nice to get some things from local guys and make sure they stay in business. And I don't know, I fish these flies, and they make an interesting silhouette of a bug in the water, and I can't swear that I catch more fish with them, but maybe because I use them more. So I'll take the nylon gun brush and scrub out a little bit of that dubbing underneath. Yeah, I'm just kind of brushing the fuzz out of the way because the next thing to go on there is a nice coating of Sally Hansen's Hard as Nails. Yeah, if you're lucky, you can get that on there in one coat. Sometimes I come back with a second coat to get it to look a little more, it'll shrink and soak in, and it'll look a little more like a solid shellback if you do the second coat of Sally Hansen's. Now here I put a drop underneath because there are some thread wraps that show there, and the head cement darkens those, and that looked better to my eye. I know the water probably would have done it, but we'll make sure the eye is clear, and we'll call this one done. So hopefully you got a bunch of these in your box in mid-April, early May, and when the fish are feasting on nymphs. So thanks for hanging in there. If you want to learn more about me, look me up on Amazon. Until next time, be safe.